There's a specific kind of quiet that only happens at 2 a.m. in a tent when the fire outside has gone down to embers and you can hear the other person not sleeping either. That's the quiet I want to tell you about. His name was Theo. We'd been friends since sophomore year of college, the kind of friends who didn't have to explain anything to each other, who could sit in a car for an hour with the radio off and not feel weird about it. I want to be clear about that part because what happened later only makes sense if you understand we weren't two guys circling each other for years waiting. We were just friends, good ones, the kind you assume you'll have forever without ever thinking too hard about why. The camping trip wasn't even supposed to be just the two of us. Marco and Devin were coming too, but Marco's car broke down 2 hours before we left and Devin bilayed to deal with it, and somehow Theo and I just went anyway. Neither of us suggested canceling. I remember that now and wonder what that meant, if anything, before it meant something. We drove up to this spot near the Sierra foothills that Theo's older brother used to take him to. 3 hours of him doing this thing where he'd start a sentence, get distracted by something out the window, and never finish it. I used to find that annoying. That day I found myself waiting for him to circle back to whatever he forgot, just so I could hear him laugh at himself for losing the thread. We set up camp before it got dark, one tent because we always shared a tent because tents are expensive and we were broke and it had literally never once felt like a thing. I want you to sit with that detail because it matters later. It had never been a thing. Dinner was the usual disaster. Theo trying to cook something ambitious over a fire that kept dying, me eating an undercooked hot dog and pretending it was fine because he looked so proud of himself. He had flour on his jaw from trying to make some kind of campfire bread, and I almost told him, and then didn't, because it was kind of funny watching him walk around all night not knowing. It got cold fast once the sun dropped. That part of the trip was completely normal. Nothing about the first few hours suggested anything was coming. It was around 10 when the weirdness started, if you can even call it that. We were lying outside on the picnic blanket looking up, because Theo wanted to show me some meteor shower he'd read about, and for a while neither of us said anything. Just the kind of silence two people who are comfortable with each other can sit in without it meaning anything. Then he said, out of nowhere, "Do you ever think about how many people you'll lose touch with without meaning to?" I laughed because it sounded like something he'd say after 3 beers, except he'd only had one. What brought this on? I don't know, I was just thinking about it. He didn't look at me when he said it. He kept his eyes on the sky. Like, statistically, most people you know now you won't know in 10 years, not because anything bad happens, just drift. I didn't think anything of it yet. I said something like, "Are you trying to tell me you're drifting from me?" Half joking, the way you do when a friend gets a little too philosophical at night. He went quiet for a second too long. "No," he said, "you're actually the one person I think about that with. Like, I think about losing you and it doesn't feel like a statistic, it feels like a thing I'd actually notice." I want to tell you I had some big reaction at that moment, but honestly, I just felt warm. The good kind of warmth you feel when a friend says something sincere and you don't have a script for responding to sincerity, so you just kind of sit in it. I said something dumb like, "You're not losing me, man," and he laughed a little and the moment passed, or I thought it passed. We went back to the fire a while later. He was unusually quiet for him, Theo, who fills silences out of habit, who can't sit still without narrating something. He kept poking the fire with a stick he didn't need to poke it with. "You good?" I asked. "Yeah." Then a beat later, "Can I ask you something and you don't make it weird?" That's never a sentence that ends well, and not in a bad way necessarily, just unpredictable. My stomach did something I didn't have a name for yet. "Sure," I said. "Do you ever think you know everything about a person and then realize you don't?" I said something like, "Sure, everyone has stuff they don't share." He nodded slowly, staring at the fire, and didn't say anything else for a solid minute. I almost let it go. I almost changed the subject to something easier because that's what you do with a friend who's circling something, you give them an out, you make space. But something in his face, I don't know how to describe it without sounding like I'm dramatizing it after the fact, but he looked like someone standing at the edge of a pool deciding whether the water's too cold, except the decision clearly mattered more than pool temperature. "There's something I never told you," he said. "And I've had like 4 chances to tell you over the years and I always backed out, and I don't know why tonight feels different, but it does." So, he stopped, laughed at himself, the nervous kind. God, I sound insane. "You don't," I said, though my heart was doing something weird by then. "Just say it." He looked at me, actually looked, not glanced, and said, "I've had feelings for you since junior year. Not just like a phase, the actual kind. And I never said anything because I didn't want to lose you as a friend, and you're the most important person in my life, and I figured having half of you was better than none of you. I did not see that coming. I want to be honest that even writing this out now, knowing how it ends, I still feel that same jolt remembering it, that specific kind of silence where your brain is trying to recompute everything you thought you understood about a relationship in real time. I didn't say anything right away. Not because I was disgusted or freaked out, nothing like that, but because I genuinely didn't know what I felt, and I think he read that delay as something worse than it was because he started talking fast, the way people do when they're trying to undo a thing they just said. You don't have to say anything. I've been carrying it for 3 years and I almost told you 100 times and I didn't want to die never having said it. That probably sounds dramatic, I don't know. Theo, I said his name just to get him to stop talking. He stopped. Give me a second, I'm not freaking out, I'm just processing. Okay, his voice was small in a way I'd never heard from him. Here's the thing I have to be honest about because the whole point of telling this is to be honest. I wasn't sure in that moment what I felt about him romantically because I'd never let myself consider it. Not because I was scared of being gay or bi or whatever label might have applied. I'd dated guys before, that wasn't new information to me, but because Theo had always existed in this specific category in my head labeled friend, and that category had walls I never tested. So I sat there testing them in real time in front of him, which is a deeply unfair thing to do to someone who just told you they loved you. I know that now. Say something, he said eventually quieter. Even if it's bad, I can't sit in this. It's not bad, I said, I just don't know what it is yet. He nodded like that was an acceptable answer, but I could see something in his face fold in slightly, like he was already preparing to lose. That's the part that gets me even now, that he'd clearly rehearsed this confession enough times that he had a contingency plan for rejection ready to deploy immediately, like he expected it. We didn't talk for a while after that. We just sat by the fire, and it was the least comfortable silence we'd ever had together, which says something because we'd had plenty of silences before that were the good kind. Eventually he said, I'm gonna go to bed, and got up before I could respond and disappeared into the tent. I sat outside by myself for probably 20 minutes after that. I'm not going to pretend I had some cinematic moment of clarity under the stars. Mostly I just felt sick to my stomach, the specific sick feeling of knowing you've hurt someone by accident and not having fixed it yet. When I went into the tent, he was lying with his back to the entrance, not asleep. I could tell by his breathing, the way you can always tell with someone you've shared enough silence with but pretending to be, to give us both an exit from the conversation. I didn't push it. I just got into my sleeping bag a few feet away and stared at the tent ceiling. I lay there going over every memory I had of him, not in some sweeping romantic montage way, more like an audit, trying to figure out if there'd been signs I missed, moments that made more sense now. There were some. The time he got weirdly quiet when I mentioned a date I went on sophomore year. The way he always offered to drive even though he hated driving just so we'd be in a car together longer. Small things that on their own meant nothing and stacked together meant something I'd never let myself add up. I didn't sleep much. Around 4 a.m. I heard him shift and I said not loud, just into the dark, are you awake? A pause, yeah. Can I ask you something? Yeah. When did you know, like actually know? He was quiet for a second. There wasn't one moment, it was more like I kept noticing I was happier in rooms you were in, and then one day I realized that wasn't a friend thing anymore, that was a different thing and I didn't know how to put it back. I didn't say anything for a bit, then, I'm sorry I didn't say anything good back there, I wasn't trying to make you feel. You don't have to apologize, he said too fast. I dropped a bomb on you in the middle of nowhere, you're allowed to need time. I don't think I need time to know I care about you, I said. I think I need time to figure out what kind of caring this is, because some of it might be the kind you mean, I just don't know which parts yet. He was quiet for a long time after that, long enough that I thought maybe he'd actually fallen asleep or maybe he just didn't know what to do with that answer either. Eventually he said, that's the most honest thing anyone's said to me in a while, and I heard him roll over and that was it for the night. We woke up the next morning to weather that had turned gray, a little damp, the kind of cold that gets into your hands. We didn't talk about it over breakfast. We just did the normal camping things, packing up, dousing the fire, the logistics of leaving, both of us clearly grateful to have tasks to hide inside. It wasn't until we were hiking back to the car, maybe 20 minutes in, that he said, almost to the trail in front of him rather than to me, "I shouldn't have told you. I think I ruined something." "You didn't ruin anything," I said. "We're not gonna be the same now." "Maybe not the same," I said, "but not ruined, those aren't the same thing." He didn't respond to that, but he didn't argue either, which from Theo was its own kind of response. Here's where I have to slow down and tell you the part that actually changed things, because it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a kiss in the rain or some big declaration. It was smaller than that, and it happened almost 3 weeks later. We kept hanging out after the trip, texting, normal stuff, both of us acting like nothing had happened, which is its own exhausting performance when you're both aware the other person knows you're performing. I kept catching myself noticing things about him I used to just absorb without registering. The way he laughed with his whole face. The way he always remembered small details about my life that I'd mentioned once in passing months earlier. I started wondering if I'd always noticed those things and just never let myself call it noticing. 3 weeks later, we were at his apartment, just hanging out, watching something neither of us was actually watching. And during a lull, he said, completely out of nowhere, in the same tone he'd used to comment on the weather, "I think I need you to tell me, one way or another, because the not knowing is worse than whatever the answer is." I turned to look at him. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at the TV, jaw tight in that way he gets when he's trying to seem unaffected and failing. And I said, and I remember this exactly because I'd been rehearsing some version of it for 3 weeks without admitting I was rehearsing it. "I think I've been scared to find out that I might feel the same way, because if I do, there's no version of us going back to being just friends, and some part of me has been mourning that possibility before it even happens." He turned to look at me slowly, like he was scared that moving too fast would break it. "What does that mean, like actually mean?" "It means I don't think I've been imagining it as a friend thing when I think about you," I said. "I think I've been doing what you did, carrying something and pretending it was smaller than it was." Nobody said anything for what felt like an embarrassingly long time. Then he said, quiet, almost like he didn't want to spook it, "Can I kiss you? I need to actually ask this time, I don't want to guess wrong." I said, "Yeah." I'm not going to walk you through the details of that part because honestly the kiss wasn't even the part that stuck with me most. It was after, when we just sat there, foreheads basically touching, both of us laughing a little out of pure nervous relief, and he said, "I really thought I ruined us on that mountain." "You didn't ruin us," I said. "You just told the truth a little before I was ready to hear it, that's different." He laughed again, softer. "I rehearsed that confession like 40 times in my head, and not once did I imagine it going like this. I thought you'd either say it back immediately or never talk to me again. I didn't plan for the middle option." "The middle option's where real stuff happens, I think," I said. "Nobody figures themselves out instantly, I had to actually sit with it." We didn't define anything that night in some big formal way, we just existed differently after that, the way two people do once something's been said out loud that can't be unsaid. We started doing the things you do, actual dates, his hand finding mine in places it never used to, both of us slowly recalibrating what normal meant for us. It's been over a year now, we still camp, we still share one tent, except now it means something different and neither of us pretends otherwise. Sometimes I think about that night under the stars and how close I came to giving him an easy, comfortable non-answer just to keep things simple. I think about how he almost let the silence after his confession be the final word, how easily this could have ended as a story about an awkward camping trip that quietly cooled a friendship instead of starting one. What I keep coming back to is something he said a few months ago, almost as an afterthought, while we were setting up a tent at that same spot in the foothills. He said, "I used to think the scariest thing I'd ever do was tell you. Turns out the scariest thing was waiting to find out if you'd choose me back." I didn't have a clever response to that, I just told him I had. That I still do, every time, even on the days it's not easy, even on the days we're just two tired guys arguing about whose turn it is to do dishes. Because that's the part nobody tells you about stories like this, the confession isn't the ending, it's not even the climax. It's just the moment the real story finally gets permission to start. Everything after that, the slow, unglamorous, deeply human work of actually building something with someone, that's the part that matters. That's the part I think about more than the night under the stars. He's asleep next to me right now, actually, as I'm thinking through how to tell this. And I keep looking over at him thinking about how close we both came to never finding out what this could be. How many versions of us exist in some other timeline where one of us stayed quite a little too long, where the silence won. I'm glad it didn't in this one.